You're about to play an unfinished level from The Last of Us Part 2. The reason we added this section is there are a few sequences, and we picked the 3 of the best ones, that we cut from the game. You know, often we build a game that's much bigger than what ends up being the final product. They were months away from being finished, but we wanted to give you an insight of what it's like when we built a game, because often we have this whole thing constructed and it doesn't have final art or audio or dialogue. And here you get to see the building blocks of what it's like when we first string a bunch of these levels together. This is the intro to the first deleted level, and this one is the roughest of the 3. We wanted to show more of how Jackson operates. So this is the festival where Ellie ultimately kisses Dina. This sequence would have come very late in the game as a flashback sequence while you're in the farm with Dina. And we wanted to show what is the rest of Jackson doing, and wanted to put on the stick, make it interactive. So you could see when you're outside, there are all these almost like carnival games that you can play. You could mix drinks, you could play with these kids that are playing a sort of clicker Marco Polo, sit down and listen to conversations. And all the different interactions were first or second pass, very, very early passes. The building blocks are there, but nothing is final. And ultimately, while we were very excited by this sequence, it's pretty fun and lighthearted. It just slowed things too much as we're barreling towards the end of the story at this point. So again, reminder, rough, missing audio, missing animation, missing gameplay tweaks, missing dialogue, but pretty representative of what it would have been. So enjoy.
Originally, this level was going to transition us to farm. We would go all the way through to the dance, where Ellie and Dina share their first kiss. Then we would play through farm, and when Ellie plays the guitar at night, she would remember the Seth incident. So, the opening for this was a little tricky. We needed it to match at least a little what you might expect emotionally coming from prior beats, because we were already purposefully disorienting you in time and space. Remember, you just came from this huge fight. To jump straight into it would have been a little too jarring. After some back and forth, we rooted it in Ellie's nerves, calling back to her hands shaking in the theater. But this time, for a much more innocuous reason we'll find out later. She's nervous because she has a crush on Dina, who is the only reason why she's here at the dance. Something we really wanted to do was highlight the way their lives had turned upside down since she went down this path. We had this idea of recontextualizing all of our usual gameplay mechanics that were designed for really violent ends. The workbench, door bashes, throwable weapons, and even the infected, which is my personal favorite. Peppered throughout the level are moments of levity or shared history, all the while seeing how happy and mundane they all were before her huge revenge odyssey. It is not a festival without one of these throwing games. This one, of course, uses our throwable system where you're often chucking explosive things or stunning things, but for a more wholesome purpose, although some people take this game really seriously. A fun aspect of this is if you did well, you could win a toy here. Ellie would place it in her pocket. If you had done this, you'd find the toy with JJ, the baby, later back at the farm. When we cut this, the toy made it through anyway because it was so cute. It is the same one you see on the tractor at the farm. Ollie the elephant. The makeup artist is pretty simple. It's one of those little in-game scenes we peppered in to make it feel like Ellie had roots in the town. Hallie, our writer, mentioned that in her mind, an ex-girlfriend of Ellie's tattooed her arm to cover up her scar. So we figured this might be the only time you get to see that. We wanted to hint at it and allude to it and make it feel like there had been so much more that had been happening and so much more that Ellie threw away. This is one of my favorite sections because I think that it achieves both the slice-of-life aspect of Jackson while also being a stark reminder of how dark the world that they live in really, really is. To attract attention and curiosity, one of the kids was supposed to make this adorable, messed up little clicker impression, and the others would giggle. We tried a version where if you got close enough, the kid might try to follow you a little before turning back. Since clickers are blind and move by echolocation, for this game of messed up tag, Ellie must close her eyes and listen for when the children give themselves away. The thought was that these kids are in relative safety. They still grow up with the dangers of clickers and runners, and all those lessons would embed themselves in the games that they play. When the festival got cut, they tried to preserve this moment and move it to the front of the game where the snowball fight is, as a tutorial. However, being in the headspace of a clicker doesn't really teach you how to deal with them. Eventually, it evolved, and they instead made the snowball fight, which was, I think, way more effective. For me, it's character illuminating that not only does Ellie know this game, she plays along. There's a familiarity with the kids that's really nice to see, especially because it's such a difference from the Ellie we see later, who has a sort of hollow normalcy that she's trying to get with JJ, but kind of fails. We use our workbench a lot to make a lot of things that kill and maim and hurt people. Here, we had the silly idea of using the same feel, harkening back to the same animations, using the exact same UI, to instead fix a drink. Like the workbench, you could pick your base, and then you could add something to it. And at the time, we had some different reactions from Ellie based on how strong you chose to make the drink. Something we wanted to prototype, though, before it got cut, was picking up some ingredients around to add, like a lime or maybe a bottle of someone's favorite whiskey or salt, like you were earning upgrades. We also toyed with having Ellie carry around the drink you made and occasionally sip it, psyching herself up to go talk to Dina inside because she's nervous. It got too noodly though, because she would need to keep placing it somewhere before she did anything, so it would have ended up more trouble than it was worth. There's a hidden spot at the back that was just a bit of fun. It was highlighting Jackson's normalcy with something we would find in a real world. In the back, you would find teenagers finding some alone time with each other in a dark corner of a party. It was rewarding the player for peeking into a hidden corner, but ultimately redirecting them back to the festival. We also had versions of them smoking weed here, despite Maria's consternation, probably having gotten it from Eugene.
In this second deleted level, which is an extended sequence of the sewers in Seattle, this comes on the heels of where Ellie goes into a building and she survives an attack by stalkers and gets thrown out of the window and gets swept away by the current. And then we cut this section that used to be there in the final game. Now you will get to play it. So this was a way to get a bit more interesting puzzles, interesting traversal, figure out how Ellie can navigate the sewers with the fighting current. Ultimately, with a lot of these levels and these sequences, the reason why we cut them were for pacing purposes. But here it is for you in this very kind of raw form that part of it will feel finished, parts of it will feel like assets are missing as far as audio, animation won't be final. But it's a glimpse into what a game looks like when it's months away from finishing. Enjoy.
Отцепись от меня! Так. Сраный Сиэтл. Так, где это я?
The ladder acts as an immediate goal for the player, but being able to climb out is not going to be so easy. To keep levels interesting and engaging, we alternate between positive and negative values the player experiences. Here, it's a positive to have found the ladder, but then a negative to discover it's not the solution. But then another positive to identify the next short-term goal of the doorway. By alternating between these opposing values, we give players what they expect, but not how they expect it.
Вы что, издеваетесь? Так. Должен быть другой выход.
This level, internally known as Fine Nora, was quite long in duration as we had to make Ellie traverse a far distance to the opposite side of downtown Seattle. The sewer section was originally longer than what we released the game with, approximately 10 minutes more. This was one of the few areas of the game that used water flow as part of a traversal puzzle. The player has to go upstream to use the current to get to the platform to reach the other side. We mostly cut this mechanic game-wide, however it remained in essence in the section swimming to the aquarium as Ellie when you were avoiding the waves. When players reach the doorway and enter into the room, they are faced with a dead end. The real reason for this dead end room is that on the reversal, when exiting back out of the doorway, players are faced with the route onwards. A pipe that they'd not been able to see when they were swept past it on the way in, and something that was hidden from view when on the side platforms. The intention here being that the only option is to go off the standard path in order to search for a way out.
Заберите меня отсюда.
Throughout the rest of the level, we also used light to indicate to the player that they were heading in the right direction. At each turn, however, we blocked the direct route forward. Players would know that they just have to keep finding alternative paths, promoting those feelings of being desperate and trapped. We slowly introduced the player to consider climbing into smaller pipes and crouching in these tight spaces. This is to slowly build up to, and encourage, the player to climb into such a small pipe that they'd have to be crawling on their stomach, which is something that the player previously may not have recognised as a playable space, let alone the desired route they need to take. We slowly introduced the player to consider climbing into smaller pipes and crouching in these tight spaces. This is to slowly build up to, and encourage, the player to climb into such a small pipe that they'd have to be crawling on their stomach, which is something that the player previously may not have recognised as a playable space, let alone the desired route they need to take. We added a tiny space just to reward the player's exploration with a pickup item, and we made sure it was something that made sense that you'd find in this area. A canister and all the garbage that had been washed into the sewers from the surface. We loved the idea of making Ellie prone through a tiny dirty pipe in order to get out, as it was a great opportunity to use our prone mechanic. A unique camera setup was created to support crawling in these pipes, as the standard prone camera is much higher above the player. We also created custom collision in order for Ellie to manoeuvre in these tight spaces easily. Initially, the oblong collision capsule around her character caused issues crawling around corners. We put extra effort into the custom corner collision so the movement experience is as smooth as the main game. In order for the player to feel cramped, claustrophobic and desperate, we'd been enforcing the traversal mechanics that allow for a tight environment which promote these feelings. We introduced the use of the squeeze through so that we can keep the player feeling enclosed and tight, but without repeating the same geometry. Here we change from low ceilings with wider walls to high ceilings and tight walls to change up the spatial pacing and keep the level from repeating itself.
Да пошли вы все! Вот где я точно не хотела бы сдохнуть.
Originally, we had the waterline much higher here, so players had to swim through this tight tunnel. However, from watching user test feedback, it was occasionally causing people to discount the route entirely and turn back on themselves. So to avoid any risk of this happening in the final game, we present a lower water level so the tunnel is easy to see and commit to using. Although this isn't as impactful without the prone swim, it's the better decision as it means a smoother experience for the player with no backtracking frustration. As we surface from the water and over the crest of the slope, we reveal what is further in this tunnel. A clicker that has sprouted and the fungus has grown on the sides of the pipe. It was great to see people who user tested this area becoming increasingly worried as we forced the player to squeeze past the fungus and inches away from the clicker's face, all the time not being sure whether the clicker might be alive or attack them. Although we aren't as cruel as to force a clicker attack in such close proximity, we do have a payoff for this moment. This clicker momentarily turned into Joel to show Ellie's PTSD from what happened to Joel at the start of the game. Ultimately, we decided to save this moment for the farm level, as it was more impactful there because it could become the centrepiece of that experience. Whereas in the sewers, we weren't able to make it as much of a narrative point and give it the breathing room and reaction time that it deserves, given the tight space.
Вот черт! А!
For the final section, we eventually opened you out into a wider area as you traverse through such tight spaces leading up to this. So changing the environmental pacing makes it begin to feel like we're coming to the end of Ellie's ordeal. An earlier iteration used the current that we'd shown at the start for a slightly tougher traversal puzzle to conclude the sewers. The ladder was clearly visible from most of the area, but the player was faced with a fast-flowing torrent of water they couldn't cross. If the player attempted to jump into the water, they were not able to swim across the ladder due to the water's speed. But instead they had to traverse the pipe running along the top of the space in order to get across the water. Using this pipe was retained in the iteration we shipped with, as it's the last of the extreme methods Ellie has to undergo in order to escape the sewers, and what she will go through in her pursuit of revenge. The last ladder climb is quite lengthy, and although we could have trimmed it down to a shorter climb, we liked how this last segment of the journey built anticipation for whether there was success at the top or not after all you've been through. Ultimately, the ladder exits out into the subway station, which is how it connects in the final game. Ellie then has to find her way to the hospital from here, crossing paths with the scars for the first time.
For this third and final deleted level, what we call the boar hunt sequence, this was a sequence pretty late in the game. It was right after the whole Seattle Abby sequence where Abby spares Ellie. And then we wanted to come back into Ellie's story, but keep it a bit mysterious of how much time has passed, where is Ellie now? So we're coming in on Ellie, and she's following a trail of blood. And we wanted to mirror, in a way, the deer hunt sequence from the first game, but this time do it with a boar. And there's something with Ellie that now she can't let go of this violence. She's pursuing it, even against this innocent animal. This was another opportunity to show how the violence that Ellie has experienced, the violence that she witnessed being afflicted onto Joel, is still sticking with her, and she's still experiencing these PTSD moments. This was a sequence that was pretty far along and was cut pretty late in production. Parts of it are still really rough, but the gameplay, the building blocks were all there. I think you'll have fun to see, like, again, a rough, unfinished sequence that you can play. You can see all the way to the end, and including a cinematic that we end up cutting. And the remnants of the sequence ended up being mentioned in Ellie's journal. So this part of the story that we developed still made its way into the game as kind of optional stuff that you could read about, but here you get to experience it. So as a reminder, this is pretty rough, months away from being finished, but you get to see it now.
Где ты?
So the boar hunt was one of the hardest levels for me to work on. It was a huge challenge with the systems that we had, and we kept trying, but it never felt quite right. Originally, the level happened after the Jackson Festival, which also got cut, but before Farm. Once the festival got cut, it became the prologue to Farm. The intended experience is that we jump forward in time after the fight with Abby in the theater. We don't know where Dina is. We likely assume she's dead because she was just bleeding out. Ellie is alone. Her hair is short. So maybe this is the future or the present. And she's hunting. Hunting who? Abby still? In early iterations of the fight, it was more arena-like. The player slowly whittles down the boar's health. Ellie gets more visceral and more vicious. We get a little worried about her. As the boar gets weaker, more panicked, more feral, and we start feeling sympathetic to the boar was the hope. In all of these iterations, especially of these wider areas, it required custom AI and scripting to make sure it continued to feel organic as an animal, but we really needed it to do specific stuff. It needed to be able to close distances really, really quickly. It needed to charge to attack, but we wanted the feeling of hunting, so we needed to track it down from afar. And we also needed to discourage the player from attacking the boar when it's that close, or it would kind of turn into this melee kerfuffle. How do we do this in our world while keeping the boar believable?
Однозначно нет.
We must have gone through 5 or 6 iterations of the boar fight and all, and every single time it changed pretty drastically. We split it into clear phases, where one was like all long range. We tried another where you're getting close and you get the jump on it quite literally. You're jumping off of a rock to attack it. And then finally, we tried a bunch where you almost sort of go around a bunch of trailers and try and wrestle it. We uncovered after some time that taking down a boar over several phases felt very laborious and a little dramatic. It was comically long. It felt too boss-like, a little too gamey. We decided to cut the first few phases, and we opted for a cold open after the boar had already been hurt off screen. So that allowed us to focus on feeling like we're closing in on prey and to introduce the boar when it was at its most dangerous. Already hurt, already feral, much too close for comfort. And so the thinking was it would bring us more into Ellie's mindset. Is this really hunting for food, or is she hunting for some other reason? The gas station was built to highlight the bore's destructiveness. Since it's cramped, the bore feels larger. We also feel trapped with it, though perhaps it's trapped with us. When it charges, it gets to us quickly, so we must be on our toes. This made it more aligned with Ellie's sort of hunting for trouble mindset. Listening became more important, as well as moving around slowly so it didn't hear you. Could you spot it before it saw or heard you? And could you get a shot off quickly enough so you could dodge out of the way? Or is the shot worth the cost after? It feels like a gamble. By the end of the fight, everything would likely be in shambles.
Так.
The boar would burst through the
Ни
back,
хрена
and
не
Ellie would follow it and finally enact revenge.
Черт! Попался! Некуда бежать.
The boar kill was supposed to be anything but glorious. With the boar whimpering at the back of the gas station after Ellie's relentless hunt. After this, hearing the drone that
Okay. Thank you all for what is about to be a very long presentation. So Anthony and I ran some numbers, and to our best guess, The Last of Us Part 2 is 10. To 30% longer. The Last of Us Part 1. However, this is the most detailed story. Presentation we've ever done. Like, if you think about the presentation for T1, where we kind of talk about the quarantine zone in somewhat detail.
even though most of it changed. And then it's like, and here are some things that might happen with Joel and Ellie. They might go into a spore-filled subway tunnel. They might fight some cannibals. At some point, Joel will get incapacitated, and Ellie, this has everything figured out, even though it might change. Every character is accounted for, every cinematic is accounted for in this presentation, which means it's going to feel twice as long as the first game. So when you freak out, that's normal, that's part of this. Oh, this is about an hour and a half to 2 hours, so hopefully you got your pee break. Okay. So we open on 15-year-old Ellie. This is a few weeks after the events of the first game. There's a doorway leading down to this basement, and Ellie sees Tommy, and he's just finished climbing out of this basement, and he's hurt bad, and he's rambling about something needing to go after these people. Ellie's trying to ask him what happened, where's Joel, and he doesn't make any sense to her, and she starts to go downstairs. Tommy grabs her hand and tries to stop her, but he's too weak. She rips her arm away, and she heads down. And with each step, her heart races faster and faster as she sees this trail of blood. She opens the door, revealing Joel's mutilated body. And then shock just sets in, and she screams and tries to grab his body, and Dina comes and rips her away, and on that cacophony of sounds, silence. Oh, we're just getting started.
I've been working on this game since we finished. Well, really, been thinking about it since we finished The Last of Us.
So many people were like, Last of Us 1 is so perfect. It should never have a sequel. They shouldn't make a sequel.
They're like, oh, it wrapped up super great. But I think actually, if you look at the ending...
Swear to me that everything that you've said about the Fireflies is true.
Ellie is accepting a lie.
I swear.
Okay. She has a very good bullshit detector. She knows something doesn't feel right, but I think is too scared at that point to ask.
How long can you really live with accepting a lie like that?
The Last of Us feels like an origin story for this survivor in this post-apocalyptic world. Seeing like how Ellie has become such a strong, unique character, it really felt like, you know, if we were to do a sequel, it'd be a shame for it not to focus on her.
Move the fuck out of the way.
Yeah, once we're done with this whole thing, I'm gonna teach you how to play guitar. Yeah, I reckon you'd really like that. What do you say, huh?
Joel, he's gonna... teach Ellie to play guitar. That always felt like that's just this like unanswered promise that like was kind of lingering at the end of the first game. We did this thing called One Night Live, where we had the actors come on stage and reenact certain scenes.
Say we get you to the Fireflies. What happens next?
Marlene, she said that they have their own little quarantine zone, and that doctors are still trying to find a cure.
I wrote this new scene that takes place after the ending of The Last of Us, but it was only shown to people in the audience. Like, we cut off the stream right before we showed them the scene.
If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself. Try and sometimes you'll succeed to make this man of me. Our future days of you and me. She's yours.
No, I don't know the first thing about this.
Hey, I promised you I'd teach you how to play.
That scene ends with Ellie holding the guitar and playing one note. And that image was so strong in my mind that I'm sure that kind of trickled into this idea of this trailer. So I started working on some concept art, kept fleshing out the story. And as it felt like it was kind of gaining momentum, Uncharted 4 needed all hands on deck.
Naughty Dog had always made one game, and as soon as it finishes one game, it works on another. When I started on Uncharted 3, we were starting to experiment then with trying to do 2 teams. After we finished Uncharted 3, I jumped onto Uncharted 4. At some point in time, Uncharted 4 was coming down to the wire, and it's just, we had to shift resources, and pretty much everyone just ended up on Uncharted, trying to finish it up.
So I said, okay, before I come on like in full force on Uncharted 4, I just want to capture this trailer.
I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and I fear no evil, because I'm blind to it all. Said I walk beside the still waters, and they restore my soul, but I can't walk on the path of the right, 'cause I'm wrong.
During the entire production of Uncharted 4, that's all I could think about. I had a lot of investment in Uncharted 4, but the day we were done with Uncharted 4, I went right back to that trailer to wrap it up. Anything for this shot that's still happening?
Not in animation.
Of the shadow of death.
This one feels kind of strong to me. Drawing a lot of attention. Can we tone that down?
Yep.
Actually, my biggest fear with this announcement is that it leaks early. More than anything, I have nightmares about this trailer leaking early before we get to PSX. If we're going to surprise people, PSX, the PlayStation Experience, hasn't set itself up yet as a place where big titles get revealed. That's E3.
No!
We're revealing the Uncharted single-player content at the opening of the show.
You're late. I thought you were professional.
Oh, you should relax. You'll live longer.
No one's going to expect a second Naughty Dog title to be revealed in the same press conference.
Please welcome to the stage, Sean Layden.
There's one more special unveil we have for you tonight. Please enjoy it.
When we first revealed The Last of Us, the Naughty Dog logo came up and the crowd erupted, and it was such a high that that's almost been like chasing the dragon, like wanting to recapture that feeling.
Oh my God. Why does this look like the Last of Us Stadium?
Playing it at this surprising moment, I'm hopeful it will have a similar feel.
What are you doing, kiddo?
People outside the studio have such an attachment to the first game, and I've definitely seen fears about not wanting to make a sequel because somehow if it's bad, it will tarnish your feeling about the first game.
I'm gonna find. And I'm gonna kill. Every last one of them.
We're doubling down on those fears and not calling it The Last of Us some subtitle. It's The Last of Us Part 2 to say it's all one story. the concept for the sequel had to feel compelling enough, have enough weight that felt like, okay, this is an experience worth creating, worth spending the next 3 years on. I became really intrigued with the idea of the cycle of violence and how, like, certain events would trigger acts of violence that then would beget more acts of violence.
It's almost never satisfying. It never brings the person you love back. And despite you thinking it's going to bring some closure, it doesn't. We just need more empathy. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could create an experience that lets you safely explore those feelings? With that theme, all of a sudden everything fell into place and this outline emerged. The whole catalyst for what starts the second game is Joel killing the doctor.
No!
That feeds right back in that idea of that cycle of violence. Now it sets up this whole kind of sequence of events. We're gonna start the game where you're playing a new character. That sequence ends with this character killing Joel. And we really have to paint her as this monster. Then when you play the next chunk of the game and you're Ellie and you're gonna pursue justice, quote unquote, and you're gonna go kill this entire crew, we're gonna go back in time and show you that same sequence of events, this character that you saw as a monster, to now get you to see things from her perspective. And how this crew is a bunch of people trying to survive in this world. And they have their reasons for pursuing and finding Joel and killing him. And the story was becoming very epic and ambitious. And I had a few parts that I was kind of stuck on. And I felt like to kind of shake things up, I wanted to bring in another writer.
I thought it was a very thoughtful story about violence and obsession. He had Abby, sort of like this girl who was the daughter of the doctor. And that Ellie would go on this vengeance quest. And when he was like, and then Ellie actually kills Abby, I was like, what? You're gonna... Yeah, let's fucking do it.
Not only is she contributing in a lot of ways, I feel like she's challenging what this story can be. She's wanted to add more romantic intimacy between the characters. Those are areas that I've been, I don't know, more uncomfortable writing that stuff. After the first day, she was telling me that she went home and told her husband that, I think I just got Ellie's girlfriend pregnant. Because that was her big idea the first day, and that had this trickle-on effect and actually added a lot to the story.
Ellie is this very relatable character. I thought she was a perfect vehicle to challenge this notion that violence doesn't have a cost, because it does have a cost in reality. It's going to ruin this girl. You know, people love Joel and Ellie, and we are about to kill one and make the other one a villain.
I was very nervous telling Troy we're going to kill off Joel. In the first game, he was advocating that Joel should die.
When I read the ending to part one, I was like, you're going to piss a lot of people off.
Let me go.
Marlene is the closest thing to a parent that Ellie has had outside of Joel.
You just come after her.
A lot of people got hurt, and Marlene would be one of those people.
Joel has crossed these moral lines, and therefore he deserves to die, and he thought it might be a more dramatic ending. And I was like, no, you're crazy. But then in the second game, that's why I was thought oh, he would take it pretty easily.
He goes, so Joel dies, and he's like, and so this happens, and then and I literally had to stop. I was like, can you give me just a second? Because it literally was as if someone was telling me about how my friend had just died.
I think he kind of took it hard. It was like the character meant so much to him. We're going to kill off this character. His role is going to be much smaller on this one.
All of a sudden, it was, please don't take this from me yet.
Ellie is scared to be alone. Everybody that she's loved up until that point she's lost them.
It's hard to imagine the story without Joel dying. Like, you feel that hate, Ellie feels that hate. You're one-to-one, you're on the stick, and that informs the rest of the story.
This way, come on!
You okay?
Yeah.
We get you through interactivity to really connect and empathize with this character.
Y'all act like you heard of us or something.
And then make you feel like I've led Joel to a trap.
When we started out making Last of Us Part 2, Neil actually wanted to be very ambitious about changing the game almost entirely. In the first, 4 or 5 months, the game was actually kind of an open world, inspired by Bloodborne. And it was purely melee focused, it was all hand-to-hand combat.
It wasn't just the melee combat, we were also looking at sort of layout structure. Bloodborne had a very sort of an open space that sort of kept getting bigger and bigger as you explored. I really like that feeling that you get of mastery over the world. It starts to become kind of almost a character in the game itself. And so that was also something we were looking at.
We started out making it as different as humanly possible from the first game as we could, and then kind of dialing it back. The open world thing didn't work with the story that we were trying to tell and stuff.
So in pre-production, we spent a lot of time just doing setups.
I've got your back.
Self-contained sort of units that tried to expound on a single sort of idea. Trying to start out with sort of simple shapes and building up to more complex shapes. And starting out with 1 or 2 mechanics and building up to those mechanics.
Hey! Even our experiments, we try to add as much context as we can. We establish a goal that you're going to be going for. We establish beats so that there's an emotional journey, the stakes are raised. Figuring out some traversal stuff, a lot of climbing and balance beams, and seeing how far we can sort of push in that direction without it getting over the top like Uncharted.
More sort of verticality, more use of grass and stealth.
My name is Arnaldo Licea. And what do you do here? I do design.
And how long have you been doing that?
A day. I got an opportunity to work in QA, and that was a great learning experience. I shipped The Last of Us and Uncharted 4.
The thing I'm proudest of is the people who came in to a quality assurance job as a contractor, which is entry-level work, and used that job to get to where they ultimately wanted to be.
When I interviewed for the QA position, I specifically said that my goal was to be a designer.
He had formed this relationship with design where they knew they could rely on him, spending his free time designing a demo, and at the same time, him going to them and not being like, here's 50 bugs you need to fix. He went to them and was like, what do you need? How do I help you? What kind of bugs do you need? And for their part, they embraced him and were like, why don't we show you how to lay out nav mesh?
I am anxious to prove myself. There is no babying when you start. It just hits the ground running. If I don't cut it, I go back to QA or find something else. We're trying to figure out at the moment how we handle big spaces, bigger than the first game.
The enemies are so too spread out to be really considered one single small encounter. and seeing what behaviors we need to start developing for them to make it look good.
The opening of Seattle, that whole section was pretty slow and quite linear in the level design.
Let's assume that there's guys in this building, someone's starting to shoot at me from the second floor. So, okay, if I'm on the horse and I'm getting shot at, I can't take cover with the horse, so probably first thing I'm going to do is jump off. And that's slow and clumsy, and maybe we can make that faster. It's like, but once I jump off, I'm going to want to take cover behind something. It's like, okay, I'm taking cover. Now what the fuck do I do with this horse? I assume the enemies are going to shoot at it. If they don't, that's kind of weird. Does Dina ride off with the horse to help it stay safe? Well, that sucks because I'm trying to build a relationship with Dina, and if my partner leaves me, that makes me like her less. I'm like, okay, so Dina has to get off the horse and take cover with me and help me engage with the enemies. Okay, but the horse is still there, so what happens with this horse? Does it ride off on its own in order to like protect itself and then come back after? Oh, that feels too intelligent for a horse. That seems a little funny. As soon as there's range combat, the horse kind of makes it fall apart. What if we did this whole sequence on foot? How do I approach this building? Imagine this is more dense with cars and ferns and interesting ways for me to close this distance. Maybe when I get close enough, 2 militia guys come out. I have this little firefight with this front before I could rush forward and go into this building, climb up, and take out the sharpshooter that was harassing me. Really simple, small fight. Now there's tension. Guys can come from anywhere, like from this rooftop, from these windows.
And that really inspired us to take some pretty drastic changes as far as the flow, inserting more combat, opening up the layout to give the player more options as far as they explore the city.
You can imagine this as being kind of the hub with it poking into streets, and I could go into the streets and explore and find those locations, what we're kind of calling dungeons. So that's the plan. Some of these changes are big, but it got us excited. This feels like a true evolution of T1 as far as going more systemic and giving you options.
If there's concern, it's about scale, it's about scope, it's about can we actually build this thing?
The scope is always bigger than the last game. It always has been. It always will be, probably. But this scope on this game is something pretty extraordinary.
Everyone seems to agree that the thing we're building is going to be cool. Once it's done, it's just that it's such a big game.
Our games have become more and more ambitious, and the studio has gotten a lot bigger.
When I started here, we were 40 people. Now we're over 300. You can't handle that many people with a flat hierarchy. As we grew, we've had to introduce new titles just to control management, control communication, make sure things don't fall through the cracks.
We have no producers at Naughty Dog.
There's so many talented people here that you can rely on and lean on. It makes the game better. And that's really kind of the secret sauce of Naughty Dog, is how collaborative it is.
You find the right people who really want to do the best they can possibly do, and then you kind of give them the resources to try. You're getting what you asked for as a creative person, right? You're kind of getting the freedom to go as far as you can go, but sometimes I think we need to be saved from ourselves a little bit.
With The Last of Us 2, there's a real sense of opportunity. This is going to be a much cleaner production than we've done in the past. We're going to get it right this time.
This is the first project that has had the proper pre-production period, where we have locked down, for the most part, the story beginning, middle, and end before we started production. That hasn't happened. I don't know if that has ever happened.